So this prayer is actually very interesting because it basically thanks Hashem for forming our body. And excuse me, and it goes into that he created different holes in our body, right? Things come in, things go out, our mouth, our nose. I mean, and specifically in connection to going to the bathroom, I mean, it seems like it's actually a big deal. Right? Anyone knows if it's someone who, I mean, on a simple level, right? Constipation, it's a small thing. But people who have real like medical issues with it, it can be life-threatening. So the fact that like every part of our body is working is actually a miracle in itself. So this is an amazing, beautiful prayer that you should know by heart. So Ta'ir, I have a seat for you right here, my friend. We were thanking you before, but you weren't here to get the things. Yes. Yeah. So I know. So Ta'ir, go get some food. So that's Ta'ir. That's the lady I was thanking. She's a mother in camp, and she's been volunteering. So thank you, Ta'ir, for helping out. So this is just an amazing prayer. We actually have one. I don't know if you noticed it. Right outside the bathroom, when you come outside and you wash your hands, if you take the time to read it, we recognize the miracle of the way Hashem created our body. You know, I think, this is not really a conversation about do you believe in God, not believe in God, but I think it's important to recognize that sometimes it's amazing to see how the design of the human body is, you can't make that stuff up. Yeah. You know what I mean? The human being cannot, the way Hashem designed our bodies is, and by the way, the more one studies the body, the more unbelievable it is. And the truth is we become more grateful when one part of our body stops working, right? Or when one part of our body is not working to its maximum. When you feel pain, that's when you recognize the brilliance of it. But the way Hashem designed the human body is miraculous. And this simple, the whole world talks about gratitude and gratitude journals and all that. And it started from the very beginning of time, and it goes through, it's just a beautiful, beautiful prayer. So, as you know, we had our organizing project for the past couple of weeks, right before camp started, and I found a whole stack of them. So I know I give you gifts every week from the things that I found, but I have a bunch of them. I don't know if I have enough, but I think I have enough, especially if there are couples here, one per just one per family. So I'll leave it over here. Come and get one at the end. Hang it up. Don't put it in your bathroom. That's why we keep it out of the bathroom, because anything with Hashem's name, you can't have in a bathroom. That's actually the only room in the house that there's no mezuzah. Right? Because a bathroom is what we call in Hebrew tameh. It is impure, and we don't have a mezuzah there, and we don't pray in the bathroom. And that is actually, because we haven't washed our hands in the morning, that is why when we say the Moda Ani prayer, what's missing from Moda Ani? Hashem's name. You don't hear Hashem's name. Okay, now we're going to go. So that was just a little intermission right there. Then we're going to go ahead. It's a good one, no? Let's go ahead. Yes, Rita.
What's the difference between God and a doctor?
No, let's hear.
God knows he's not a doctor.
That's a good one.
That's why everything, our body depends only on God.
Yes, this is true. And by the way, a mitzvah that many people don't know about is the mitzvah of taking care of your body, so that you can use your body to fulfill its mission in this world and bring Hashem into your life. But the reason, it's actually one of the 613 commandments. Anyone know what the mitzvah is called? In Hebrew, v'nishmartem ma'od l'nafshosechem. Straight out of the book. Okay, let's do Shema. We're on page 19. Right hand, we cover our eyes. This is our pledge of allegiance to Hashem. For those that don't have books, please share with your neighbor. Let's do it together. Let's cover our eyes. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And we whisper the prayer of the angels. Baruch Shem Kivod Machoso Li'olam Va'ed. Let's sing it together with 19 in Hebrew, 20 in English. V'ahavta es Adonai Elohecha v'chal levadecha uv'chal nafshecha uv'chal miyodecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ela asher anochi mitzavacha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'sheftecha b'veisecha uv'lechtecha v'aderech uv'shachbecha uv'kumecha ukshartam lios al yadecha v'hayu letotafos beinenecha uchsavtam al mezuzos beisecha uvisharecha. All right, tell me, what are the 12 months of the year? Let's see if you can do this. Page 99. 1, 2, 3, page 99. Do it with me. Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, Shvat, Adar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, and Elul. These are the 12 months of the year. What month are we in? We're in Tammuz. What's today? Today is the 15th day of Tammuz. So we're doing pretty good. All right, let's do this. Let's do the 12 most important verses. You know these 12 verses? You know life. Everyone have their papers? By the way, for those that it's your first time, hold on. For those that it's their first time, this is our Hebrew School of the Adults, and we are in grade number 7 today. So we have started in grade number 3, we went up to 4, we went up to 5, we went up to 6, and we are in grade number 7. All right, let's do this. I want to hear you. Here we go. Come on, everyone should know this by heart by now. You've been doing this for I don't know how long. Come on. Don't be shy. Let me hear you. Torah, Torah, Tziva, Tziva, Lanu, Moshe, Torah, a gift from Hashem to every Jew. Torah, Tziva, Lanu, Moshe, Marasha, Kehilos, Yaakov, Shema, Yisrael, Hashem, Elokeinu, Hashem, Echad, Hashem is one. Number 3. Bechal darvada chayav adam lerais esat my kilu yatam mitzrayim. In every generation, a person must believe of exile speedily. Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek li'olam haba shenemar ve'amich kulam tzadikim. Li'aylam Yershu Aretz Neter Mata'ai Ma'aseh Lisba'er. Has a place in the world to come. Every Jew has a place. Yes, everyone. Kikarai Le'lecha Hadavar Me'ay Peficha U'Vevavcha. It's close to you. He can do what is right and he will succeed. Number 6. Nitzav alav u'melaycha haaretz kevadai. Im avdai karaoi. Hashem is everywhere. Hashem sees and hears. Hashem knows what's inside our hearts. Hashem knows what's inside, what we do decide. This is the very first verse of the Torah, number 7. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'es haaretz. In the beginning, Hashem created the heavens and the... Number 7, this is from Shema. I'm mixed up. Nantam levanecha v'dibarta bam בשבתך בביתך. Come on, Zaylin, you know this stuff. Ooh, come on, you're back in preschool. It's perfect. Kumecha, we shall teach our children and the next generation. Let's pass on to them the Torah of Hashem. Number 9. Yagaiti v'lai matzasi. Yagaiti v'lai matzasi al ta'amin. Yagaiti umatzasi. La yagaiti umatzasi tal ta'amin. Yagaiti umatzasi ta'amin. If you work hard, you will succeed. If you try your best, you will have success. Work hard and succeed. Try and try, you will achieve. Do your very best, and you will have success. Number 10. Rabbi Akiva Omer Zeh Klal Gadol B'Torah. Love your fellow. Love every single Jew. It's the basis of the Torah. This is our mission in the world. This whole world was created to have a home. That's why he made it. Torah and mitzvahs is what we have to do. That is why Hashem created me and you. Zera Yisrael yesh lo l'smayach b'simchas Hashem asher sas v'sameach b'dirasa v'sachtonim. Let us Hashem with happiness and joy. These 12 Pesukim. I am very proud of you. I feel like everyone feels so accomplished when they sing the song. It's like, come on, you said 12 verses. This is good stuff. All right. Our new lesson for today on page 172. So we have been talking about, we started off with prayers. Then we, hold on one second. Then we went to blessings. We spoke about the 12 Pesukim. We spoke about certain mitzvot. We spoke about certain holidays. We spoke about the Jewish life cycle. And now we are going through Jewish concepts. So, Terry and Taylor, I'm just going to ask the teachers if they're good to watch the kids in the lecture. Unless you have to go, but I'm going to ask them for Hinda. Yeah, I'm going to ask them if they... Give me 10 seconds. Sarah, what time did you start teaching today? Would you be able to watch? Eitan and Alma for like an extra 20 minutes if their moms could participate in the class? Yeah. You don't mind? I finally got to.
Cute. She basically came to say hi to him as well. So now he's so mad.
If it's not okay, I'll come to the door and I'll send you out to get him.
Right. No, I'm saying he's just going to be out the whole time.
That's fine. You want to just take me around the corner?
Yeah, I'll do that.
You don't mind?
Sure.
I'll tell them. Terry, they said they'll watch some extra so you guys get sick. I just asked Sarah. She said no problem.
Okay. Thank you.
I know, right? All right. I know, such a treat. Well, all right. So we've spoken about, like we look at our table of contents, we've spoken about all of these topics. So the question is, and we've mentioned this idea a couple of times, that Hashem, God, is infinite. We are finite. So even though God created this world for us, how is it even possible to have a connection? How do people who are finite have a connection with infinity? Right? Sort of doesn't make sense in the sense that it's like, think about someone who's poor and someone who's a billionaire. Could they relate? Well, maybe like on a human level, right? They're both human beings, but their lives are completely different, right? Now imagine someone so that's within finite, right? Somebody who has $1, somebody has $1 billion. But our relationship with God and the human being, we are finite beings, and God is infinite. The only way, and that's why, by the way, many people have ideas of how they connect to God. But essentially, the only way a person can connect to infinite is if the infinite chooses. And I think I gave this example before, like the ant. You see a little ant on the floor. You could just step on it and keep walking. What if you pick up that ant and you put it into a little thing, a little box, and you take care of it, and you love it, and you name it? Obviously, the ant will be forever indebted to you. But does the ant, let's say the ant is looking up at the human being, and it's like, oh, hi there, can you please adopt me? I'll do whatever you want, Whose power is it to have the relationship with the ant and the human? The person or the ant? Obviously the person. It's not even hard to understand because within I can just step on the ant and keep walking. So the only way the human being has a relationship, I guess that one didn't. The only way the human being has a relationship with God, with Hashem, is if Hashem chooses to have a relationship with us. And Hashem, God clearly says, specifically to the Jewish people, we'll talk about non-Jews in a moment, that specifically to the Jewish people, the way Hashem has a relationship with us, it says that he put all of his wisdom in the Torah. It says in Kabbalah, Araisa v'kuchabrichu kulachad, that the Torah and God's wisdom is one. So, at the end of the day, we can have a lot of ideas of how we want to connect to Hashem, but the only one who gets to make that determination really is God. A lot of what we do to connect to God is what makes us feel good, which is important, by the way, because at the end of the day, it's two people in a relationship. Well, two beings, or if you can call Hashem a being, in a relationship, right? But the choice of how we connect to God is God's choice, not our choice. Well, wrong word. Choice, we have free choice. That's actually the beauty and the gift of Hashem. Hashem has given us what's called Bechira Chavshis, free choice. We choose what to do with the information that's given to us. It says in the Talmud, Hakol bidei Shemayim chutz miyirat Shemayim, that everything is in the hands of heaven except Yirat Shemayim, fear of heaven. Nothing. I can't control anything that happens to me, but I can control how I react to it, how I choose to live my life. So the first question is, let's talk about the Torah specifically, right? Just as Hashem is eternal and everlasting, so are his Torah and mitzvos. They're the strongest weapons for fighting darkness and making the world a better place. So when you discuss the concept of God, right? It says Hashem is all, everyone thinks of God, you think of, the truth is I shouldn't tell you what you think of. You all have your own idea. And by the way, that idea of what God is to some changes, right? We have a child view of God. As we become adults, we have a different view. As we get older in our life, our views change. But here's some things about Hashem that one should know. Number one, and we did touch upon this a couple of months ago, he recreates the whole world at every moment. There are many people in the world that believe in God. They believe that God created the world, but then he left it. Meaning, not that he's gone, but he's not involved in the creation on a daily level. And Torah teaches us that Hashem gives energy and chayus, energy and life force to every living thing. So if Hashem would make a choice not to give energy to us humans, to plants, to animals, to the inanimate, to the world, the entire world would cease to exist. So when we recognize that, we go to number 2. He supervises the lives of everyone and all animals. He guides vast oceans, continents, planets, stars, and moons. This is where the idea of that's called hashgacha pratis, divine providence on an individual. Pratis means individual level. When you cross the street, or when you are stuck in traffic, talking something as simple as that, or you landed up in Venice, Florida, fill in the blank. Every single action and every single thing that happens to a person is ordained by God. Now, obviously, there's free choice, but everything that happens, Hashem is involved in. And this is a concept that a lot of people have a hard time understanding. Like, seriously, like, okay, I understand the big stuff, the big miracles.
Like a car accident.
Yeah. So some people even have a hard time with that one. All right, you want to say he's keeping the oceans around, fine. But even like my own personal situation, and the more, this is a concept that was introduced by the Baal Shem Tov to understand, when a person, I know this might seem basic for some, this might be novel for others. When a person recognizes that Hashem guides every step in their life, the good, the bad, or the seemingly bad, fill in the blank, you live your life differently. Because you start to accept and recognize that it's really not about me. I can make choices on how I live my life. I can make choices how I react to things that happen to me. And I'm sure every person sitting at this table has situations in their life that are not so comfortable. But when we recognize that this is the way Hashem designed it, for whatever reason, for our own situation, you live more peacefully. That's for sure. But more than that, we live with the sense of, okay, this is the way it is. And it's the best for me. So going back to how a small force like the human being can connect to Hashem, it describes in Kabbalah how Hashem created the world. It says that he put all of his wisdom in the Torah. And by learning Torah, its laws and its lessons, we actually connect to the true essence of Hashem. Now, to understand that on a simpler level, when you connect with another human being, right? You know those people that you connect with their brain, or like if you have a loved one, of a parent or a grandparent who has passed, and you come to a situation in life, but you know exactly what that person would have said had you asked them advice, and they're not alive. What is that? That means that you know them to their essence. You understand the way they think. Torah is the way God thinks. Torah is God's brain, if you can understand that. We don't use the word organs with God because God's not a human. But Torah is God's brain. Who better to listen to than the one who created us, right? God created the human being, created the psyche, the psychology, the idiosyncrasies. Everything about the human being comes from Hashem. And then Hashem went ahead and made a manual on how to live our lives. Who better to follow, to at least listen to, than to the one who created us? So when we actually, and by the way, even if we don't do a mitzvah, but if we just sit down, like right now we're sitting down and we are learning Torah. Just the act of learning, not any mitzvah, no Shabbos, no kosher, nothing, just learning Torah. The mitzvah of learning Torah, it's one of the 613, connects us to God's essence. That's why it's the mitzvah that goes, it's like the cream of the crop mitzvah. That's why it's actually a mitzvah to study Torah every day of your life. Because every day of your life, you want to have that like touch point, that connect, even if it's for 5 minutes. Even if it's you're going online and you're listening to something. When you learn Torah every day, you connect to the wisdom of God, you connect to God's thinking, and that is the ultimate way of connection. So that's the cream of the crop of all the mitzvahs. Then, at Mount Sinai, what happened? So at the giving of the Torah, what happened? The Jewish people are slaves in Egypt. They go out. Who leads them out of Egypt? Moshe, and they crossed the Red Sea, and now they're on the other side. And 49 days later, they reach the foot of the mountain. They reach Mount Sinai. And Moshe receives the luchot. What were the luchot? The tablets. There was thunder, there was lightning, and we actually read, I believe we read the description a couple of weeks ago of how it sounded. The luchot were 2 solid cubes of sapphire, and they were the same size. 5 of the 10 commandments were on each side. On the right side, if you look over here, right, Hashem is one God. Don't make or serve idols. Do not use God's name in vain. Keep the Shabbos holy. Honor your parents. And on the left side, the other luchot was do not murder, do not act unfaithfully in marriage, don't steal, don't be a false witness, and don't be jealous. These are the 10 commandments. Now, my question to you is, how do you view them? Do you see a differentiation between the right and the left?
One is about God, the other.
Correct. One is you and God, and one is you and man. But there's one mitzvah that's between you and man that's on the wrong side, seemingly. Honoring your parents is on the right side, but that's really between you and your parents. Why is it with the mitzvot connected to God? Because we honor our parents for 2 reasons. First of all, say again? So this is good, but this is actually talking about in the literal sense, your parents. It does not say love your parents. You don't have to love them. Love is an emotion. Honor is an action. It does not say to love your parents, it says to honor them. Honoring one's parents, we do it not because we love them. We do it because God said so. And because they and God partnered in your creation. So God and your parents are worthy of honor simply because they brought you into being. For no other reason. They could be the worst parents in the world. And there are some really not great parents out there for whatever reason. No one is absolved from the mitzvah of honoring one's parents. And we're going to talk a little bit later about the oral Torah and the written Torah. But it actually is written in the Torah, how does one honor one's parents? What are they obligated to do? What does honor consist of? But I think it's very valuable to recognize a few things about this. Number one, honoring is not love. You can be respectful without loving someone. You're still obligated to honor your parents no matter what, because they gave you life. The second thing is the fact that creation of a human being is godly. You know, we've spoken about this when we spoke about the laws of mikvah and intimacy and how there's been so much, what's the right word? There's so much, the concept of conception of a soul, of a body, of a human, and the birth of a child and the birth of humanity is one of the holiest things in the world. Really, not one of, probably the holiest thing. Because it's the most godlike thing. It's creation. See, God, human beings create ayin me'ayin. Yesh me'yesh. Something from something. Take a book, I get it, and make it out of paper. The paper from the wood of the tree, right? From the seed. Human being is the closest thing that's yesh me'ayin. Something from nothing. Closest thing. There's no child, and then there's a child. So the idea is that it's a godlike thing, and that is deserving of honor. And that's why it's on the right side. So that's as far as the 10 commandments. Those were the first things that happened. And then Moshe went up on the mountain, and Hashem commanded Moshe to write the entire Torah verbatim, written down. And before I go into, and then throughout this Torah is written all of the 613 mitzvos. Now, before I get into the details of how this process came about, the Torah was written, where was Moshe, what's oral Torah, what's Talmud, what's Gemara, what's Mishnah, what's Nevi'im, what's Ketuvim, what's Tehillim. There's like 90,000 books. I don't know what's going on. So before I get into that, because that's actually very interesting, I just want to say one thing. There are 613 mitzvahs, right? Mitzvahs relate to every single part of our lives. It helps us become better people, and it shows us how to serve Hashem and behave with others. Now, when we do a mitzvah, ultimately, we connect to Hashem. We can do a mitzvah for no other reason than besides the fact that God told us to. Now, there are certain mitzvahs that it tells us reward. You know, one of the few mitzvahs that Hashem tells us a reward for is honoring our parents. It says clearly in the Torah, "Leman ya'arichon," you will have long life if you honor your parents. So that's interesting, number one. But we don't honor our parents so that we have long life. Yes.
How do you honor your parents?
So
speaking respectfully is the only thing that I've caught with my ear.
So we actually have to open a Shulchan Aruch. We have to open up the Code of Jewish Law and actually here, look. I mean, I'm Googling it, but if I had to honor your parents according to Torah, there's actually, let's see if it'll come up. So I'll find a link and I'll post it. But just so you know, there's actually there's laws of honoring parents. Like, I don't want to just say, oh, here's some basic laws. I'll send you a link. It gives you no, really. It's a whole of everything. It's not, yeah, It's a longer thing. It's actually it goes into details what you need to provide. How do you treat a step parent? It's actually fascinating to learn the halachas, to learn the laws of honoring one's parents. Now, something that I want to explain is that the reason we do a mitzvah and the reason we learn Torah is for one reason. What is that reason? It's just for connection to God. Now, the mitzvahs are divided into three categories. There's mitzvahs that are called, and I've said this to you before, but I'll say it again. There's the mitzvahs called mishpatim, there's mitzvahs called chukim, and there's mitzvahs called eidos. Okay? The mitzvah of the three types of mitzvahs. Let's start with eidos. Eidos are the ones, the word eidos actually means witness. They commemorate certain events. For example, we eat matzah on Pesach to commemorate or the witness of the miracle that happened. Shabbos is under the category of eidos. We commemorate the fact, I sneeze, but excuse me. We commemorate the fact that Hashem created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. Okay? Those are commemorative mitzvahs. They're under the category called eidos. Then there's the mitzvah of mishpatim. The mishpatim mitzvahs are the mitzvahs that make sense. Don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't be jealous. The ones that, you think to yourself, I could have thought of that one. It's actually interesting. I don't want to get into this at length, but the fact that this is godly versus humane. Like people say, do I have to keep mitzvahs in order to be a good person? It's an interesting question. And in truth, when we do certain mitzvahs that seem basic, like don't kill, and I know this is an extreme example, but Nazi Germany, in their mind, I'll give you just an example, they were doing the right thing. Hundreds of thousands of people thought this was the right thing. Yes, they had a reason for it, and it made sense to them. The challenge with humanity and with human error, with humans in general, is that we have the ability to be fallible. We have the ability to fail, and we can make wrong judgment. God never makes wrong judgment because God's God. So when we take certain things in our hands, like don't kill, don't steal, we say, okay, this is worth it. We risk making a mistake. But when we do it because Hashem said not to do it, it brings us to another thing. But anyways, mishpatim are things that make sense. Yes, Sima.
What about like natural disaster, like earthquake or?
What about it?
And people dying there.
What about it? That's not killing.
It's not.
Well, you could.
A soldier has a job, and his job may be to fight other people.
So the Torah addresses defending oneself. When you defend, absolutely. Are you kidding? If somebody, it says clearly in the Torah, if someone comes to you to kill you, you should kill him first. Because saving one's life is of paramount importance. Most important, actually. Saving a life, your life or someone else's, comes before any mitzvah. You know that. Like if you have a choice to die or to not eat kosher, it says eat not kosher once so that you can keep kosher for the rest of your life.
So basically, common sense.
Not common sense.
No. There is a common sense and there is a Torah. So that's
Correct, and that's where the difference lies. The third type of mitzvah is called chukim. Chukim come from the Hebrew word chok. A chok is a mitzvah that we do even if we don't understand it. Even if we don't understand it, like kosher, mikvah, like we don't really understand the laws of purity and impurity. We understand it to a certain level, and Kabbalah has given us the gift of understanding things even deeper. But there are certain mitzvahs like shatnez, not wearing wool and linen. There are certain mitzvahs that we do it just because Hashem said. And in a sense, that is the beauty of the relationship with Hashem that we have. Because anyone who's been in a relationship or is in a relationship, especially between, let's say, a husband and wife, right? We recognize that there's a lot of things we do in a marriage that we do it just because we love the other person. It makes no sense to us. It's not our style. We don't get it, right? Or there are things that we don't do that don't make sense, that we don't get it, right? And that's just the way relationships work because love takes that over. Being in a relationship with Hashem is the same thing, if not more. There are things that we do that we understand. There are things that we do that commemorate. And there are things that we do even if we don't understand it. But we trust that on some level, especially in God's world, it makes sense to Him. And it's an expression of our love towards Hashem. And by the way, there's nothing wrong in life, and this is obviously a much more extensive topic, but there's nothing wrong in life with saying, I know I don't know. I know I don't understand. That's okay. That's okay. The recognition of that. And sometimes it takes time and it takes learning. And one of the gifts of Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy is that a lot of the chukim, we have a much richer understanding and depth and meaning to specific mitzvah. So this is all just very general. Okay. Now, when Hashem created Adam, the first man, He gave him and his descendants, Adam wasn't Jewish, he was the first man, 7 commandments that the world needs to live by. If everyone kept these laws, the world would be filled with justice and peace. Most people became wicked and didn't listen, though, so Hashem destroyed them in whose flood? Whose time? Noah. It was just 10 generations. Only Noah was the most righteous, who was the most righteous, survived. Noah and his family took pairs of every type of animal and put them in the big wooden ship that he built called the Teva, the Ark. And then came the 7 Noahide laws. Do not believe in or worship idols. There's only one God. Do not curse God. He is your creator. Do not murder. Lead a moral family life. Do not steal, which this was made for children, but that means when it says lead a moral family life, it means do not commit adultery, do not steal, establish courts of law, and do not take a limb from a living animal. Those are the 7 Noahide laws that apply to every human being, Jew and non-Jew alike. Jews have an additional 606 mitzvahs. The world has 7. We were chosen for an extra 606. Non-Jews who keep the 7 Noahide laws are called righteous among the nations. They will be rewarded by Hashem and receive a share in the world to come. Okay? So that is the introduction to Torah and to mitzvahs. Torah and mitzvahs, in short, is our connection point to God. The biggest mitzvah one can do is Torah learning, not in reward, but in connection. You're getting into God's brain, God's way of thinking. The 613 mitzvahs are divided into, we didn't say this, but they're divided into 248 positive and 365 negative. Positive means things you should do. Negative means things you shouldn't do. Certain mitzvahs have both. Like it says, keep Shabbos and don't break Shabbos. So when one observes Shabbos, they get two mitzvahs. The fact that they didn't do certain things and the fact that they did do certain things. And that totals to 613 mitzvahs. Did you know, by the way, that there's 248 limbs in the body, and there's 365 sinews in the body, very much connected to the body, and that's another whole topic on its own. Okay, so now we are going to go to, okay, so that's Torah and mitzvahs. Now we're going to lead us to understanding a big topic that many people struggle with called the written Torah and the oral Torah. Now, truthfully, this, and I again, forgive me, I say this every week, this really is a 6 to 8 week topic because it's very, very complex. I'm going to try my best to whip it out in a way that you could understand it on a simple level, okay? So here goes. Hashem gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai. Many people say, which Torah? What does the Torah consist of? So the Torah has two parts to it. There's the written Torah and the oral Torah, okay? The written Torah is called in Hebrew Torah Shebechtav. I'm on page 175 for those that want to follow. The Torah Shebechtav, katav means to write, consists of 24 books. Torah is Tanakh, and it's known as the Tanakh. Raise your hand if you heard of the words Tanakh before. Okay. Tanakh is, if you look, Tanakh is an acronym. Taf, Nun, Chaf. It's an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. So Torah is the 5 books of Moses, what you see in like a real Torah in the Ark. That's Torah written by Moshe. Nun is Nevi'im. It means prophets. It was written by the prophets. Ketuvim were written by different sages. Now, the oral Torah is a combination of explanations and teachings that were passed on from Moshe all the way down to Yehuda Hanasi, which was at the end of the Second Temple era. This was later, was only oral from Moshe. They traveled in the desert 40 years. They get to the land of Israel. They have the temple they live in with the Mishkan, the tabernacle, for roughly 400 years. Then they build the first temple for roughly 420 years. Then they go into exile for 70 years. Then they have the second temple for another 410, or I forget exactly how many years. And then there's the destruction. So up until that time in history, it was oral. All those explanations were oral. But when the second temple was destroyed, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Yehuda the prince, he had a fear that as they were being exiled and they weren't having the temple anymore, that it would get lost. So he wrote it down in the form of the Mishnah. I'll get to it in a second. I just want to explain a little bit about how that came about. So the oral Torah, so that's basically it. You've got the written Torah, and then you've got the oral Torah. The oral Torah works side by side with the written Torah. So, for example, vowels, kamatz patach, right? How we read Hebrew, you get right. When you all the dots, the periods, all the what's it called? Not pronunciation. What is it? Yeah, like when a period, an exclamation mark, a question mark, whatever that's called. I forget. Punctuation. Thank you. I'm like, what is that word? Punctuation is all from the oral Torah. Now, I think it's important before we address how that came into being, it's important to understand that a person cannot observe Torah one without the other. The written Torah cannot be understood without the oral Torah. Imagine there's no periods, exclamation marks, no pronunciation, no vowels. So let's say you say, my wife is wonderful. So you can say, my wife is wonderful, period. You can say, my wife is wonderful, question mark. It's two different lines. So we cannot, that's the smallest example. Most mitzvahs that you know about, you don't even realize that you understand it because of Torah Shebaal Peh, because of the oral Torah. Now, when Moshe went up on the mountain, Hashem explained to him the whole Torah. There were parts that he wanted him to write, and there were parts that he wanted him to teach. And this teaching, the Torah Shebaal Peh, was passed on from that time until the end of the destruction of the second temple. Now, one of the struggles that many people have with the oral Torah is it's made up by a bunch of rabbis. And I'm going to explain how this came into being. But bear with me just for a moment. Hear the whole thing, and then I want to hear your questions. So who wrote this written Torah? Hashem dictated everything to Moshe on Mount Sinai, and Moshe wrote everything down word for word. The passages that refer to Moshe are in third person because that's how Hashem told Moshe to write it. Since then, every generation has trained scribes who write Torah scrolls by hand using ink, quill, and parchment. Now, the Chumash. Does everyone here know what a Chumash is? What is a Chumash? A Chumash is the exact Torah that you see in the Ark, just in a book. Used to be the Jews, before printing presses came to be, there was one Torah that everybody studied from, right? Or no copy machines. Today, we're so lucky. Torahs are printed all over the world in many different forms and prints and big and small. When we did our book club a couple years ago, remember we had the orange one, then we changed to the blue one. But it's all the same in different languages. But essentially, the original text has never been changed. That written Torah is called a Chumash. The word Chumash comes from the Hebrew word Chamesh, 5, because there's 5 books of Moses. This Torah scroll, and people follow along in the Chumash, it's the exact same thing. It's just one is a printed book, one is the original. This Chumash is read every Shabbos in the synagogue. In addition, on Mondays and Thursdays, little portions are read as well. The printed Chumash that we learn from has the exact same words as was originally written by Moshe. Nobody has ever found a different type of Torah. Any Torah scroll that you find from ancient times, the Dead Sea Scrolls, every Torah around the world is written exactly the way Moshe wrote it all those years ago. So what is inside the Torah? So it's 2 things. First of all, you could find all 613 mitzvahs in the Torah, but it's not organized. Remember I told you that Rambam organized it? So you can find the 613 mitzvahs interspersed through the Chumash, through the Torah, but it actually is in slight chronological order. It begins with creation, and it ends with the death of Moshe right before they go into Israel. So basically, the Chumash incorporates 2,488 years because the Jewish people go into Israel in the year 2488. Chumash, written Torah, is including the first 2,500 years of history. And the 5 books, so you see it's really 5 books. It's Bereshis, Shemos, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Dvarim, or in English it's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. I don't know who made up those English words, but those are the 5 books. Many Chamashim today won't give it to you divided in 5. It'll give it to you in one book itself. I just said it. Bereshis, Shemos, Vayikra, Dvarim, and they're divided, each of them. Like Bereshis has, remember we learned this a couple years ago in our book club? Bereshis, Noach, Lech Lecha, V'yer Chaisar told us. Every book has chapters. A chapter in Hebrew is a parsha. So what's the parsha of the week? What's my bar mitzvah parsha? A parsha is a chapter. So Bereshis has Bereshis Shemos V'Yikra. No. Bereshis Noach Lecha V'yer Chaisar told us V'Yitav Yishlach V'Yishev Miketz V'Yitzvaychi. Bereshis has 12 chapters. Shemos has 11. Whatever. I'm not going to go through all of them, but they basically have total 54 chapters. There's 54 chapters total with these 5 books in heading. Each book has 11, 12, whatever. Some have a little less, some have a little bit more. So those 54 chapters are under those books. And the Chumash is divided into 54 portions, and basically there's 53 weeks. There's 1 week that we read. Some weeks we don't read any at all if it's a holiday. Some weeks we read 2. By the end of the year, Simchas Torah, when we're dancing with the Torah scroll, what are we dancing? We completed the Torah. Next week we start from the beginning, from Bereshis. Got it? All right. Did you? And then we spoke about that on Monday and on Thursday. They also read church and Mincha, Shabbos afternoon prayer. Okay. So before I get to that, Sandy, you had a question.
Yes, I have a question that it is a history book, correct?
No.
No, all right.
Good question.
When Moses received the Torah, was it complete?
So
in other words, we know that things happened after Moses received the Torah.
40
It
years.
was all written down. Did he receive it
Excellent
in
question.
its entirety,
The-
in that things were already preordained?
So what's written in the written Torah, Moshe received the Torah in the year 2448. But they didn't go into the land of Israel until the year 2488. So there was a 40-year period that didn't happen yet. The end of the Torah was written right before Moshe's death, those 40 years.
No, that's not what I mean. When God gave Moses the Torah, was it complete?
I just said. You're talking about the oral Torah or the written Torah?
The written Torah.
Moshe wrote it. What it explains is that the written Torah was written in its completion up until that time period, and those 40 years in the desert was written right before Moshe passed away 40 years later.
So he
Continued writing those last, yes.
So it was given what
90%, yeah.
Okay, and then he continued writing it
Till the end of his death, those 40 years.
But it was only the 5 books.
Correct. Now, that's what we're up to. The second section includes 8 books of the prophets. This covers the period of time when Moshe passes away, right? So they go into the land of Israel. Who leads them into the land of Israel? Joshua, Yoshua. And the Nevi'im continue all the way till the end of the Second Temple era. So who knows how many years? I just told you how many years is it from when they enter the land of Israel to the end of the the Second Temple era? It's roughly 1,200 years because it's 400 years. They come into the land. They use the tabernacle as their temple. The next 400 years is that I'm off by a few years. Is the first temple. Then there's a 70-year break. That's when the story of Purim happened, that they're exiled. They come back and they have another 400 years of the second temple. So that's probably like 1,400 years or so of that time period. That is when,
Who's writing it?
during that time period is the period of the prophets. Now, just so you, written at the time by the prophets themselves. Now, the second section includes the 8 books of prophets, and the prophets are the Torah and then the Haftarah that we read on Shabbos. The Haftarah is always a portion taken from the prophets connected to the parsha. Just so you know where the Haftarah is coming from. The Haftarah is coming from the books of the prophets. Torah reading is from the Torah itself. The Haftarah is from the prophets. These are the prophets: Yeshua, Shoftim, Shmuel 1 and Shmuel 2, Malachim 1 and Malachim 2, Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Yecheskel, and Trei Asar. This final book, what's Trei Asar? Trei Asar is including the prophecies of 12 prophets: Hosea, Amos, Yonah, Nahum, Tzefaniah, Zechariah, Yoel, Avadia, Micha, Habakkuk, Haggai, and Malachi. These may or may not be familiar to you. Now, this is what the prophets were. This was written down. Now, the Ketuvim, the holy writings, these are books that are written down, but they're not in any order. They took place, the people who wrote them took place in the time period from when they entered the land of Israel till the destruction of the Second Temple, but they're random writings. Like, for example, Koheles is written by Shlomo HaMelech, Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. The book of Esther happened by Mordechai and Esther, written in Purim. Tehillim was written by King David. So all the rabbis or the woman that wrote these books was in that same time period as the prophets. The prophets are written more in a chronological order. Yeshua first, Shoftim second, Shmuel Aleph first. This is more a compilation of books that were written at different times. So this is what is known as the written Torah. Now, the oral Torah okay, so the oral Torah is more complex because they were not written down until the end of the Second Temple era. All of these laws that were told to Moshe, it says, like in the Ethics of Our Fathers, how it's written, Moshe Kibbutz Torah Messina Masarla Yeshua Zakein Zakein Lenavim. It's a pretty famous line from Ethics of Our Fathers. That was what was known as the Masorah, was passed on from one leader to the next until the end of the Second Temple era. Now, a lot of interpretations and meanings and discussions came about through the oral Torah. So, for example, something we learn from the oral Torah, right? The tefillin, it tells us we have to a man has to put on tefillin, but it doesn't tell us what should be inside the tefillin box, where should it go on the body, how many times a day. It goes through, it just tells us the very basic. Hashem explained to Moshe the details of how, why, where, etc. I'm just giving you an example, like I gave the example of the pronunciation, is that every mitzvah in the Torah comes with the oral component. What happened was, at the end of the Second Temple era, Yehuda Hanasi, Yehuda the prince, was a leader at the time. He knew that the Jews would be going to the diaspora. They would be leaving, Israel. And if it wasn't written down now, there would be a lot of confusion. So he wrote down the Mishnah. The Mishnah is 6 books: Zroim, Moed, Nashim, Nezikin, Kedushim, and Taharos. Each of these deal with different laws, like Zroim is laws of agriculture and brachas, Moed is laws of Shabbos and Yom Tov, Nashim, laws of marriage and divorce, Nezikin, laws of damage and property and justice, Kedushim, laws of the base of Mikdash and Kashrus, Taharos, laws of purity and mikvah. The Mishnah is the foundation of Jewish law. That was the first written time that anything was written from the oral Torah. Any explanations or discussions on Jewish law that followed is always based on the Mishnah. Mishnah is the foundation of oral law. So, what's the Gemara or the Talmud? As many of you know, the Yerushalmi Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud. It's a written discussion of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is a discussion of the Torah. Understand? So when a person learns Mishnah, they start in the Hebrew day school, they start Mishnah at grade 3, or it's called Mishnayos. Gemara, they don't start till grade 6. Because you first have to learn Mishnah, you have to know how to learn Mishnah before you learn Gemara. A Gemara, you see this big book? Anyone who's ever been to my home, have you ever seen those big Gemaras, you're like, what are those books? We have a set here also. It takes one Mishnah and it has 1,000 discussions. Rabbi Hillel said this. It's opinions, it's discussions, but it always ends off, what is the final law? The Gemara is not philosophical. The Mishnah is not philosophical. I feel this way, I feel that way. It's not feelings. It's not emotional. It's law. It's hard text law. You know which people love learning Gemara or Talmud? Lawyers. Seriously. There's a lot of Chabad rabbis that go to lawyers' offices and teach Talmud, like for lunch, like lunch and learn. That is their topic. We once did that. We had a bunch of lawyers years ago. Rabbi ran a Talmud class. They were blown away. They could not believe that this wisdom exists in Torah. Way better than the Constitution. It's actually very interesting to hear from the perspective of a lawyer. And to a certain degree, there are certain similarities with our Constitution and our Torah in the sense, the Constitution, right, all the amendments, The founding fathers, they sat down and they wrote it. But then imagine they actually explained what they meant. There wouldn't be so much error. There's so much error, unfortunately, in our law system because there isn't an oral law that came from our founding fathers. It was written and it's up for interpretation. The Torah is not up for interpretation. The Torah has been interpreted, A, by God, B, it was orally passed on until the end of the Second Temple era, and then C, it was written down. But here comes, before I go a little bit deeper, let me explain to you something else. So we've got the Mishnah that was written down. We've got the Talmud. I know this is heavy for one class. The Talmud that explains the Mishnah. And then we have the Shulchan Aruch. Have you heard of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law? That is, if you don't want to go open up a Gemara and discuss, Hillel said this, Shammai said this, Rabbi Shimon said this, what's the law? I don't care about the conversation. Shulchan Aruch is one book. It's the bottom line. If you want to know what does it mean to be a Torah observant Jew, you open up a Shulchan Aruch, and you have a question. What is the law? You just have to open up a Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. Actually, Shulchan Aruch literally means set table, because the books are all very organized and very clear. So a Shulchan Aruch is really the only book you need if you want practical halacha, if you want practical. Now, in the Shulchan Aruch, there's 4 sections. There's Aruch Chaim, Yoreh De'ah, Even HaEzer, Choshen Mishpat. Aruch Chaim deals with daily life. You wake up in the morning, where do you wash your hands till? Yoreh De'ah, the laws of kosher food and purity. Even HaEzer, the laws of marriage and divorce. And the Choshen Mishpat, the laws of business. So it just divides it in a very easy way. Like, one of the best consequences, shouldn't say this on camera, but that I won't say which kid, one of my children were disrespectful to a teacher, and the principal gave them, he said, open up Shulchan Aruch, page whatever, find the law that says how you respect the teacher. You have to write it in Hebrew and in English. That was his consequence. It was great. It was such a good consequence. Like, no, he didn't scream at him. He didn't, nothing. He just said, this is your consequence. You're going to read it. You're going to learn what Hashem says, how do you respect the teacher, and you're going to move on. It was such a great idea. So, yeah, this is what you do. That's how a Jew gets a consequence. You open up your, this is what Hashem says. This is how you respect the teacher. So this is the evolution of the laws written down from the oral Torah. It was first written down in the Mishnah by Yehuda Nasi. Then the Gemara were the discussions. Now, why are there 2 Gemaras, the Talmud Bavli and the Talmud Yerushalmi? The one from Jerusalem, the one from Babylonia, because there were different groups of people studying. The people that left and were exiled in Babylonia, they were having their discussions. The people, yeah, more. Yeah, this is the life. And then Gemara, etc. Now, Shulchan Aruch was the final book that takes all the opinions and brings them into the final halacha. Now, what's important to understand is 2 things. First of all, and I want you to listen very carefully. While there's many conversations and discussions in the Mishnah and the Gemara over the oral Torah, there's one halacha. There's one law. There's no 2 opinions on one law. The law is the bottom line. So it's important to recognize that there will always be room for discussion in Torah. And when the rabbis are, it's actually fascinating, when the rabbis are arguing and discussing, but I think it makes sense that this is the answer because look at this, and he brings down this, and then the other one says, wait, oh, look at this and look at, right? This is Judaism. That is what Judaism's about, the conversation. But there's majority, so hold on that note, it's not just that majority wins. Hashem set up the 13 principles of interpretation. And this is something that many people don't know. This is the second thing I want you to listen very carefully. There's 13 ways that we interpret halacha. And the reason Hashem set it up in this way is because to a certain degree, the oral Torah is still continuing. When we have a new situation that comes up, let's say pulling the plug on someone who's breathing on a machine, is that called ending life, right? That's not a conversation they had in the times of the Talmud because guess what? There were no machines. How do we, and these questions in halacha come up on a daily basis. Do you know that there's so many different conversations that happen in not only conversations, questions that come, think of questions connected to like infertility and treatment, right? They didn't have such treatments, medical treatments or just medical stuff alone. How do we come up with the answer today of what is the mitzvah, what is the halacha, if it doesn't say every scenario that comes up? So Hashem instituted, and it's clearly written in the Torah, 13 principles of interpretation. Not any Joe Schmo can come and say, I'm an interpreter. This is what I think halacha is. You need to have someone skilled, trained, according to the laws of Moshe from the time of Sinai, to actually understand what it means to be able to interpret the law. So, for example, Rachel, you asked a question. No, listen, a few weeks ago, about I wanted to say something interesting. You asked a question about being able to volunteer during the week of Shiva for your brother.
Yes.
Very interesting question. She wanted to volunteer, but it was the week of Shiva. Is she able to? So she asked Rabbi the question. She got her answer. The answer was no. But that's not the point of why I'm bringing it up. So Rabbi and I were having this conversation after that question. We were talking about how if there is a question, right, there's basic halacha that first of all, an observant Jew knows. And then someone who studied to be a rabbi, got smicha, and learned even more depth, has more clarity on halacha, on law. But there are many questions that come up that he doesn't know the answer because he's never encountered such a thing in his life. So what does he do? He's a rabbi.
Yes, another rabbi.
He asks a rabbi more skilled in this particular area. It's not, what am I feeling today? What do I think the halacha is? The idea of asking a rabbi or someone trained is the way Hashem designed the observance of halacha. I'll give you an example. There was a person in our community who passed away a couple of weeks ago, and someone we knew very well. And we unfortunately found out that he passed away. We don't know if it was in his sleep, if he had a heart attack, but he lived alone. And it was very sad. We knew him very well. And his neighbors noticed that his car wasn't coming in and out of his house. Long story short, they went in to check on him. They found him dead. Rabbi had to go and examine the body and see if it was possible to bury it according to Jewish law. It was a very, I don't know if the word is traumatic. It was a difficult situation to be able to see a body in this state. I mean, he deals with tahara and death all the time, but you could only imagine what the body looked like. And he really was, he knew he wouldn't be able to do a proper tahara on the body, the proper washing of the body because the body was decomposing. But he had to know, how does he put on the tachrichim, the body, the shrouds that a person is buried in. He had to go back, and he planned the funeral for Friday. The man didn't have any family, and he was really having a very tough time. He spoke to two different rabbis, and they gave him two different opinions. And it was the same opinion of how you put it on, but one had one way, one had the other way. Anyways, we were taking a walk that night, and he was, I'm like, what's bothering you? He goes, I'm not comfortable with what I'm doing tomorrow morning for the funeral. It's not my soul to play around with. He's like, if it's my body, I can do what I want. But I have an obligation to do the mitzvah the way Hashem wants it done. I said, so call someone. Like, why, just make a phone. We stopped on our walk, pulled out his cell phone. I said, call a rabbi a very big guy in Brooklyn. I said, it was 11 o'clock at night, but rabbis get phone calls at all hours. He calls him, he picks up on the first try. He says, Rabbi, so-and-so, I'm struggling with this. I heard this. Rabbi says, the only guy you need to speak to is a guy in Williamsburg, in Brooklyn. He is what's called in Yiddish, a mumcha, an expert in issues like this. He calls him right away and back, and he says, you have to wrap the guy, the details, in the shrouds completely. He says, listen, it's not a body I feel comfortable even to touch. It's without going into details. It wasn't even able to. So he says, listen, this is what I know in my field of work. I cannot, what's in Yiddish, paskin the halacha, I cannot tell you what the law is. You got to speak to this guy in Miami. He deals with what's called chesed shel emes. He called the guy in Miami who referred him to it was a long night. But he finally got, by speaking to 6 different people, the person who deals with this on a daily basis. This is what he does. This is his field. And he explained to him exactly what he needs to do. And one guy said, the guy before him said he has to fly in someone else, from New York or from Miami to do, because Rabbi said, I can't physically not do it myself. I can't even ask a member of my community. It's not possible. I'll do it, but I can't do it myself. They said, you need to fly someone in. Then someone else, both rabbis got on the phone. Long story short, he got clarity. He went to sleep like a mensch that night. He woke up early in the morning. He did it, came home. He was happy, said, I did the right thing. Why am I sharing you with this story? Not just to give you a glimpse of, what goes on at daily life in the Shmuel's house, but to give you an understanding that it's not a feeling. It's not even an interpretation that Rabbi, who you all know is a very knowledgeable person, would feel comfortable making on his own. Not because he doesn't know halacha, because there's a system in place, the way God set it up. And when we recognize that the system is godly, then it clearly states in the Torah, that the halacha, that this rabbi, the what's called the, they say psak in English, not the law, the decision that is made that this is the way it has to be done, that is the word of Hashem. Not that any random person says, I spoke to God and this is what it is, but it's following the system the way it was. Now, again, this is a 6 to 8 week course to get into detail of how halacha is determined. But I just wanted to share with you a small example just to show you that it's not simple, it's not random, and it's not personal. There's a system in place that is followed. Area, correct, but guided by the words of God. The last thing I want to end off with, and I cannot believe how late it is, forgive me, but I didn't feel like I could do this in a short amount of time, is there's another layer. There's Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'ah, Ksuvim, which are the levels of the 5 Chamashim, the prophets, and the writings. Then there's the oral Torah, which is Mishnah, Gemara, and Talmud, and Shulchan Aruch. I hope this doesn't sound Chinese to you. And then there is, but does it sound like a little familiar? And then there is, I apologize, sometimes I take for granted that I know these words by heart, but I know that they're new for some of you. So should I say it in English? Or you got me? Sort of. You could go back in your book and look. And then there is Kabbalah. Kabbalah, when the Jewish people went into exile, right, that very first time, when the Jewish people for the first time didn't have a temple, after the destruction of the second temple, they had to concentrate on remembering the Torah laws, and they didn't study Kabbalah except for great people. In the 1500s, the Arizal came to teach Kabbalah to a select group of students. The very first written book on Kabbalah, now just to understand, Kabbalah was taught by Hashem to Moshe. It's part of the oral Torah. But it wasn't learned by a lot of people until many years after the Jewish people left Israel and the temple was destroyed. It was like the secrets of the Torah. The Zohar is the very first written book of Kabbalah. Kabbalah contains in it the secrets and the esoteric part and the meaning of the Torah. But written Torah, oral Torah, and Kabbalah were all given on Mount Sinai. The first time the oral Torah was written down was at the end of the Second Temple. The first time Kabbalah was written down was in the 1500s, with the Zohar being the author of it. And then eventually the Arizal and then following him, the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the Hasidic movement, they took the teachings of Kabbalah and brought it to the masses through the teaching of Hasidic philosophy. What you study all the time with any teacher who teaches you in Chabad is always based on Hasidic philosophy. And the reason you love coming here,
I love it.
of course, the reason you love coming here is because you always have the flavor of Hasidic philosophy. It's intertwined into everything you learn. Because so much of what you learn, what Hasidic philosophy did with the base, what was one of the biggest first books of Hasidic philosophy is somebody? What's the biggest book of Hasidic philosophy that every Jew should know? The Zohar is the first book on Kabbalah. Kabbalah is explained through Hasidic philosophy at a very simple level. You and I, you study it all the time. You don't even realize. Not Torah, but it does start with a T. Not Tehillim, that's part of the Ksuvim. Tanya, very good. So it was revealed by the Baal Shem Tov. It helped inspire Jews, special for our generation before Mashiach. People of all ages can learn it. So Hasidic philosophy was introduced by the Baal Shem Tov, explored by the Alter Rebbe, who wrote the Tanya. And any person today, Jews are so far from, not so far, a little far from understanding Torah. The thing that has brought so many people back to their heritage is the learning of Hasidic philosophy. Because when you understand and you recognize, like what I said earlier today, the idea of hashgacha pratis, the idea of divine providence, that's a Hasidic concept. When you understand life and you understand who Hashem is and you understand what it means and you understand the meaning of things, it inspires a person to learn and to grow in a way that was never needed before. I'm not going to go into the whole thing of what Hasidim did to the world, but it did a lot. So that's all part of the oral Torah.
So lucky to be part of Shmerlin.
That's for sure. So I know that was probably our most intense class. I have to say, when I looked at the curriculum, from in the beginning of the year, when I saw this topic, I'm like, oh boy, that's going to be quite the class, because it's a lot of information and it's a lot to process. And I'm sure that many of you have questions. Here, let me take some down. Yeah. Here, we're passing them down here. Here, pass more down this way. Here, pass more down.
Rabbi said if I don't come to shoot 2 weeks, check on me. I might be dead before my age.
2 weeks, I'm not waiting. It's actually very sad. Yeah, please. Thank you. Here, take these. We have more.
But nowhere in here to explain why there are no Merlin chocolates.
If today's class was too intense or too heavy, I apologize. If you feel like you have any questions, please come and ask me. And the only thing I can advise every single one of you is to keep asking questions. Next week, we start our final section of Jewish heroes. That's our final.
I don't understand nothing. I'm just loving it. I'm getting used to the whole.
Yeah, by the way, just the words itself are, yes.
I'm doing nothing.
So we have, you said 10:30 would be the.